takes time, isn't it? So welcome everybody to the Water for Life side event. There are ice creams up there next to the water, if you feel like an ice cream. So we're also going to use Slido. So while we get started up, you might actually go to the website slido.com or download the app if you want to, but it doesn't matter. In both cases, the event code is R585, and we'll be asking some questions, and you can ask questions to Slido, but we're also going to be polling you. So start that process, please, because we'd love to get some feedback from everybody, and we hope that, we think there'll be more people coming. It's after lunch, which is always difficult, but we're going to start rolling now. So there's also takeaways about all the GEO groups involved in water that are part of this Water for Life event. They're at the table outside, so if you want to memorize something, if you want to contact these groups, their email addresses, their websites are on here, so you don't have to copy everything. So this is a really useful flyer to take home, and it doesn't weigh a lot for those of you flying. My name is Arnold Dekker. I now have my own consultancy, but more importantly, I'm co-chair of GEO AquaWatch. And I'll be facilitating this meeting. So the handle for the Water for Life event will be on the next few slides as well. It's R585. So if as many of you can use Slido, that would be really appreciated. So these are the groups that came together. Initially there were two different proposals. There was Conservation International wanted to talk about green and grey infrastructure, and so rather using green infrastructure than grey infrastructure for improving water. And there was a proposal by Blue Planet and AquaWatch around the use of Earth observation for many different purposes, and several of these other groups. So the organizers of this event said, look, we can't have too many side events, so they said, please merge your events. So that was actually quite an interesting exercise. And these are quite different groups. Some of them come from an Earth observation background to create a community of practice, and then they've grown on to become an initiative, and they're doing useful things in society, but others came from a problem in society which also has a water aspect. So they're very different groups, and this is the first time we've actually trying to come together. So again, this is the Slido app, so I'm just repeating that. Please use that if you can. If you've got a mobile phone or a tablet or something with you, that would be really appreciated to use this Slido code. So those groups, first, initially we wanted to do three, each present speed talks. In the end, we decided, let's try and have 3 talks around the priorities of the group on Earth observations. But those are 3 priorities. The SDGs, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the Sendai Framework. That was much more difficult for the groups. And you might see that in the presentations, is that there's a different level of detail, etc., around these themes. But it was an exercise we thought was useful to do ourselves. So 3 themes, but lots of different GEO groups. And it's a good thing that we came together and that we are coming together, and we'd like advice on how to go further after, at the end of this meeting. So I also noticed there was a bit of a bias towards oceans and coasts in the presentations. And that's because those communities exist longer and probably are better organized. And I just wanted to showcase these two reports which came out recently, and this is about freshwater and Earth observation. One from the International Ocean Color Coordinating Group, which talks about science and end users, and one from SEALS, which is about the kind of Earth observation systems we need for freshwater around the world. So this is the agenda. We'll have the three talks by Emily Smale, William Skirving, and Nick Becks. Dan Takaki will be running Slido together with the audiovisual people up there, and I want to thank Mary Beth down here for doing a lot of the organization of this. She made it all happen. And we'll go away with a panel and community discussion, and this free takeaway. There's ice creams up there, and there are some posters as well. So, well, engage with us, please. There's a panel, there's been a slight change oh no, everything, I think this is correct now. Good. This is correct. These are the people on the panel. Which will be in about an hour's time. But first, please first answer the first question. So we're polling you, which is what organization are you from? Type of organization, because we'd like to understand what type of organizations are here. So please answer the first question on Slido if you can. Thank you very much. And then we want to thank our ice cream sponsor, which is Karsten Brockmann Consulting in Germany. That's very nice of them. So a bit of applause for Karsten Brockmann. yeah. Okay, next talk, please. Emily Smale on SDGs. There's 15-minute talks with a few minutes questions. And at the end of this session, we'll look at the polling where you're all coming from what organizations you belong to.
So while they're pulling up the slides, I'm going to provide some information about what the different water activities within the GEO work program, as well as some of the activities that the participating organizations in GEO do that contribute to water related to the SDGs. And then we'll provide some examples of activities that are ongoing. So I'm Emily Smale, I'll be the presenter, and this presentation was put together by myself as well as in collaboration with our colleagues that work on some of the different activities. So to start out, when we talk about water in the SDGs, as we all know, water is really an integral part of life on this planet. It impacts all items of environmental health as well as human health. And the GEO community works to support the water SDGs in a variety of different ways. So we have been working to support the development of the methodologies that are used for the formal reporting mechanisms, as well as to provide environmental monitoring data to countries that can be used for understanding changes and impacts on water-related ecosystems, as well as water for human intake. We also have activities that are ongoing that look at supporting decision-making related to SDGs, as well as trying to look at linkages between the SDGs as well as other communities. As we all know, while the SDGs all have specific targets, none of these activities or targets are limited in scope. They all interact with each other. So the first example I'll give is some of the activities that have been going on to support SDG 14. And this has been contributed to by the GEO Blue Planet Initiative, our partners at Mercator Ocean, who administer the Copernicus Marine Service, the GEO Aquawatch Initiative, the GEO Citizen Science Initiative, as well as the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network. So one thing that GEO Blue Planet in collaboration with the GEO Aquawatch Initiative have been doing is to work with the United Nations Environment Program to develop the methodology for reporting and collecting information on the indicator related to marine pollution. And this indicator currently has one target, which is 14.1.1, which is coastal eutrophication and marine plastics. So these are obviously very different things, and so we've worked with the United Nations Environment Program to bring together experts related to eutrophication. So we've been collaborating with some of the satellite oceanographers from the GEO Aquawatch community, as well as people from the marine litter field to put together a methodology for this. And this was recently submitted to the United Nations, and it was approved, and so this indicator has now been upgraded to a Tier 2 indicator. The other thing that we've been doing beyond the methodology is working in collaboration with ESRI to extract the information from existing satellite data products to provide a sub-indicator on the global scale. And ESRI has also been working to map these satellite chlorophyll A as a proxy of eutrophication, and is planning to work to do a variety of different types of analysis and visualizations that can then be provided to countries so that they're actually able to make decisions. So when you can overlay it with riverine inputs or wastewater treatment plants, for example, you can potentially identify some of the sources of eutrophication so that they're able to make management decisions to correct some of the challenges. For the indicator on marine pollution, the United Nations Environment Program requested that GEO Blue Planet write a white paper for them that outlines a concept for a global platform for monitoring marine litter. And so we have been working on this and are compiling a draft that includes information about some of the emerging technologies for marine litter, some of the existing data, and then chapters on a concept for a data platform. So one would be a kind of general platform that has been done in the past, such as what EMODNet has done in Europe to integrate some of the marine litter data, as well as a more advanced platform that would allow people to extract information specifically related to what they were looking for. So, for example, if you were a government where you had banned plastic bags, we'd like to look at the change over time to see if you're making an impact, or try to identify if the sources of marine litter are coming from your country or elsewhere. Hopefully we can link together different data sources to provide that type of information. So this will be open for community input and presented at an upcoming meeting in Bangkok. And we also are going to be having a workshop in Brest on marine litter indicators. So moving on to some of the work that is being done by the GEO Citizen Science Initiative. They have been working with United Nations Environment Program as well in terms of developing the methodology. And the methodology that was approved by the United Nations includes citizen science as one of the methods. So that's a really positive direction. And I'm sure, as many of you know, a lot of the efforts to collect information about beach litter, for example, are really driven by citizen science. So this is really an opportunity to bring in some of the citizen science into monitoring water ecosystems. The Citizen Science Group also has a program called Litter Intelligence, where they're putting together global information, and this is directly related to the SDGs in terms of the formal mechanism, but it also provides a lot of engagement with the citizens to try to get them interested in some of the information related to water sustainability. So moving on to another case study, the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network works with a lot of different communities in the ocean observing community to try to increase the access and integration of biological data. And this is directly related to the SDG target on protected and restored ecosystems, which is 14.2. And so they're looking to put together information about trends and maps on biodiversity that helps communities and countries understand changes in the environment. So for example, that we've gotten a lot of requests for information about how species distributions are changing with climate change. So this type of information can hopefully be extracted by some of the work that MBON is doing. They also are presenting some of the information and extracting it in kind of novel ways. So looking at integrating some of the satellite data into what they call seascapes, where they take environmental parameters and group them into different types of seascapes, so similar to a landscape, but a seascape, and then can provide that information openly available to the public so that they can have information about some of the ecosystems and how they move and change. as well as looking at some emerging techniques such as looking at eDNA, where you measure DNA that is available in the water, and then you can actually get information about what types of species are available in that area. MBOT is also working a lot on global capacity, which is linked to one of the SDG 14 indicators. And some of the major activities that are ongoing related to marine capacity building for ocean observing is a program by IOC UNESCO called Ocean Teacher. And they have a global academy where they do a lot of training activities. And there also is a program called the Ocean Best Practices Initiative, where information related to methods of collecting information, as well as best practices on how to do capacity building and things of that sort, are being compiled so people have access to them. They also are putting together a journal in Frontiers of Marine Science so that researchers can submit their best practice as a peer-reviewed publication, so then you can get citation credit. So it tries to help people in that requirements for tenure track and things of that sort. So moving on to some of the geowater activities related to SDG 6, I'm going to give a couple examples from GEO Wetlands and GEO Aquawatch, and there are other GEO initiatives such as GEO Glows and the EO for SDG initiative that are also working on SDG 6. So just to make sure that everyone knows this isn't meant to be comprehensive. So the GEO Aquawatch initiative had been working with one of our partners who is based at the GEMS Water, which is a UN environment data portal for in situ water data. And they were working on the sub-indicator for lakes related to 6.1.1. And with a connection with Aquawatch, the UN environment stakeholder asked for expert advice related to how the remote sensing could be applied to this indicator. And so through this, the Aquawatch community worked to provide input into the methodology, and is also now working to develop a surface water viewer that is being developed in collaboration with the European Commission's Joint Research Council and Google Earth. And we also have Aquawatch partners that are working with the Copernicus Marine Land Service to do information related to water extent for lakes in support of this. And then the community is also working with the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites to try to increase access and analysis of water quality information and support at the SDGs. For GEO Wetlands, they had worked with the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands in coordination with the United Nations Environment Program on SDG 6.6.1, providing information about the extent of change for ecosystems. And they have some community portals that are going to be part of a wetlands knowledge base that they are developing. And they have had a lot of success using Earth observations in terms of monitoring wetland extent and change and classifying different wetlands, which are really important for decision making and environmental monitoring. So moving on, I'm going to give an example of Conservation International efforts that are more tailored towards supporting decision making for freshwater ecosystems. So the approach that Conservation International is using is to start by looking at the freshwater ecosystems context in different areas, and then trying to synthesize that data in terms of information about the freshwater ecosystems, as well as compiling information about the green infrastructure and gray infrastructure, and then using information to try to produce realistic scenarios about what types of pressures these ecosystems would be under, and what types of activities would need to be done to secure the ecosystems and help out the communities. And through this, they provide direct decision support to different stakeholders, which is really important in terms of actually meeting the SDG targets. Another specific activity that Conservation International is doing in collaboration with GeoBond, GeoGlows, and other partners is a activity that is part of the National Socioeconomic Synthesis Center, where they are planning sustainable water futures in sub-Saharan Africa. So they're working with different communities to try to understand what their challenges are, so that they can make decisions related to infrastructure and other environmental decision-making that will help ensure that the water-related ecosystems are maintained and that the communities have the correct type of infrastructure to be able to maintain security and resilience. This is another activity from Conservation International, where they are providing guidance on what the functions of the ecosystems are. And so this is a really important area of information, again, for decision making. And they have a recent publication that details this, but it helps the communities understand which ecosystems are at the most high threat so that they can prioritize conservation activities. And then lastly, I'll give an example from World Wildlife Fund, where they are looking to connect across various indicators and different types of information. And so this is a paper that was recently submitted that is looking at global freshwater biodiversity loss and how to produce an emergency recovery plan for that. And for this activity, the authors did a crosswalk of different indicators that would be needed in terms of monitoring the freshwater ecosystems. So they looked at the Sustainable Development Goals, and you can see that this crosses a lot of different SDGs, so it's not just focused on one of them, which is, I think, a core theme that is going to need to be addressed in terms of reaching sustainable development. And then they also looked at how this relates to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So in the SDG session we had earlier today, some of the countries were saying an important aspect to realize is that nations will be using the same data sets to report on different indicators, so SDGs, Convention on Biological Diversity, or other policy mandates depending on what the priorities are. And it's important to realize that that type of information needs to be collaborated and coordinated across agencies and organizations so that we can leverage the best type of decision making and resources. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the audience? Yes? Can you microphone go ahead?
How is this being used to improve the conditions for coral reefs? Sorry if it was mentioned earlier, I came a little bit late, so.
So for coral reefs, there are other SDG indicators. So for example, there's one on ocean acidification. So some of our colleagues at Copernicus Marine Service have developed a monitoring platform for that. Also, when you look at coastal eutrophication, that really impacts coral reefs. So understanding where that is happening and what the source of that is important for coral reef conservation. I'll say that there also are other Earth observation parameters that are used for coral reef monitoring, such as looking at sea surface temperature. So at the Satellite Oceanography Division at NOAA, where I'm based, we have a product called Coral Reef Watch, where they look at the heating in a coral area and have studied the corals and understand how long they can be heated before they bleach. So then they also send out bleaching alerts to provide management warnings so that people can close dive sites or harvest corals that they think may die and not survive the bleaching event, things of that sort.
One more question, possible? We can also have a panel discussion with questions. Nobody? Good, okay. So we've got the results of, thank you very much, Emily, sorry. So we have the results of the We have 21 responses from Slido. There's going to be more more questions. So for the people who newly came in here, if you go to slido.com, you can enter the code R585, and then you can participate in the Slido part of this session. This is an interesting breakdown of the audience. I saw a research institution went up just recently very fast, but as people are reacting, it's an interesting balance, and we're actually quite happy that we've got such a nice range of people here. That's great, and then we hope that would happen at the GEO plenary side event. So that's very useful for us. Thank you very much. And so we might be able to come back to that during our panel session. So thanks, Dan Takaki, for doing that. That's excellent. And keep reacting, people. Now, there's going to be a new question, which is and it's an open question, which is, what is the water issue for you? So what is and try and use 3 or 4 words, please, because otherwise it gets complicated. But what's the most important water issue for you? Whatever work you're doing, whatever you're interested in, what your expertise is, what is the most important water? So that question will be up. Is it up now, Dan? Yeah. It's up now, so that's excellent. Good. So the next talk is by William Skirving. William was volunteered by us to give this presentation. So thanks, William, for stepping up to our invitation. And this is all about geo-water activities in support of disaster risk reduction and the Sendai framework. So, William, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Interestingly enough, I actually am a senior scientist with Coral Reef Watch, so if you're interested in having a chat about that later, just ask. Yes, kicking and screaming is the term of being invited to give a talk like this. So I'll be covering 4 activities largely: the GEO for Health initiative underneath GEO, the AquaWatch initiative, of which Emily's already talked a little bit about, but this will be more about disaster risk reduction. And then a GEO Blue Planet project called WaveFORCE. So GEO for Health, they're about using Earth observation to improve the capacity to predict, respond to, and reduce environmental related health risks. Their activities can be broadly categorised into 3 types of activities: weather and climate extremes such as heat, water-related illnesses such as cholera, and vector-borne diseases such as dengue and malaria. They've divided themselves up into 7 different working groups. They're heat and infectious diseases, air quality, food security and safety, healthcare infrastructure, cross-cutting issues, and integrating Earth observation data techniques. They are wanting more participation, so if anyone in the audience is interested in getting in touch with them, they would most welcome your communication. At the moment, they've got 4 major funded projects, mostly to do with the detection, monitoring, and prediction of diseases. Some other examples of the GEO for Health activities. On the left-hand side, we've got harmful algal blooms, and you'll see that a little bit more in the AquaWatch. There's a bit of mixing between the various themes inside of GEO quite naturally, and that's a good example of one. There's an example here of cholera risk, and there's an example of NOAA predicting Vibrio using a combination of models and Earth observation data. Very handy if you like seafood and want to know whether or not you have to cook it. So AquaWatch. AquaWatch is the GEO Water Quality Initiative. their mission is to improve the coordination, delivery and utilisation of water quality information for the benefit of society. They've got a number of activities that are fairly key to water quality monitoring in general. One of them is to expand the essential climate variables. I should mention that, not going backwards. International Ocean Colour Coordinating Group has been around longer than Aquawatch, I would have thought. Yes, longer than Aquawatch, and forms largely the backbone of international collaboration with regards to ocean colour, and has been a long-term proponent of climate variables. Aquawatch is also very keen on promoting algorithms and best practices. Now, this is extremely important in terms of water quality. I have worked in many aspects of remote sensing, environmental remote sensing, that is. Ocean colour and its freshwater equivalents are probably the hardest thing to get right there is. It seems fairly simple when you look at the algorithms and things like this, but at the end of the day it is a really, really hard form of remote sensing to get right and to be consistent with it. So this is an extremely important role that Aquawatch plays, because if you don't have best practice and very consistent and good algorithms, then projects like Globo Lakes wouldn't be successful. So this is a project where they've identified something like 129, I'm plucking that off the top of my head, I've read it, something like 129 lakes around the world, and they're monitoring them for water quality through time and doing it in such a way that they can compare between lakes as well as across time. So if you don't get the algorithms and the practice, best practice, you won't get that story right, and you'll end up with all sorts of outcomes that aren't real. Some other examples. This is a water quality mapping exercise run by CSIRO that looks at Lake Burley Griffin. That's the lake here in Canberra. I thought this was a good local example. And this is a really good project to remind us that GEO is not just satellites. It's dominated by satellites, that's for sure, because, well, there's a lot of satellite data out there. But the reality of life is GEO is all about all Earth observation. So it includes satellites, it includes in situ measurements like this, and it also includes citizen science, as we've heard. All different forms of being able to monitor the Earth. This is an example of in situ system that helps to predict algal blooms. And this is a really good example of not everything that we think should be monitored from the perspective of water quality for toxic use, I guess you might call it, is obvious. So this is monitoring freshwater intrusion onto the Great Barrier Reef. From a coral's point of view, fresh water is toxic. It will bleach the corals, can kill it. So monitoring salinity is a very important activity from management of corals. So now we're on to the WaveFORCE project. The WaveFORCE project is a project that is jointly run by NOAA, Deltares and USGS, and is under the auspices of GEO Blue Planet. The project aims to predict wave-driven flooding, or flooding of all types actually, from marine flooding perspective, except tsunamis. Tsunamis are a different consideration, and you would need a different model. But this will cover inundation. It would cover flooding, so king tides, if you like, king tides with waves on top of them, normal tides with waves on top of them, any sort of marine flooding. And it's happening here and now, and that's the reason why the project has got up and running. WaveFORCE is a flood forecasting system for all coral reef line coasts throughout the world. That's every coast in the world with a coral reef outside of it. The aim is to provide forecasts out to 7.5 days at 3-hourly intervals. So every 3 hours until you get to 7.5 days, which is 180 hours. These forecasts would then be completely updated every 6 hours, and they would be point forecasts for every point along every coast every 200 metres. Why WaveFORCE came about? Because this form of flooding is increasing in frequency as well as severity, and it's largely some of the main reason for this project has been is a largely forgotten phenomenon, which tends to be called clear sky flooding. It's in other words, this flooding doesn't always have to be associated with a storm. This model, the forecast will cover storm surge, will cover storms, but will also cover all of the flooding that occurs when a storm isn't necessarily nearby. For most of the world, this type of flood prediction just doesn't exist, and so we think it's a very important thing to look at. The aims of the project is to reduce disaster risk and to increase the resilience of coastal communities. We're currently at the point where the system is developed. It's ready to be able to be rolled out. The GEO Secretariat are helping us seek funders for it. And once we get it funded, it'll take us about 2 years to roll it out, and a further 3 years to fine-tune it and get it to the point where we can consider it an operational product. This is an example that the project was tested on. So we ran 30 years of data for Ruinamu in Kwajalein Atoll on the Marshall Islands, and one of the we had data on one of the floods which occurred on the 8th of December in 2008. These are the images from that particular flood, and this is the run-up that the model outputted for 8 days prior to the flood, and this is the flood up here, obviously. Had this particular flood occurred at a different time, you would have had different tide heights, different contribution of sea surface height for mesoscale eddies, different contribution for ENSO, and if we consider sometime in the future, it'll be a different contribution from the perspective of sea level rise. But had it just been a different timing, a handful of months ago, in fact, and it could have been another metre taller. So timing is everything in this. In this particular example, in effect, the Marshall Islands dodged a bullet, but these guys would have been standing in there up to their waists in water. So these events are already to the point where they need to be worried about. So the status of the project, WaveFORCE has already been tested and we're ready to roll it out. In testing, the simplistic model that we've produced for WaveFORCE, simplistic so that it's not compute intensive, so that we can actually run it for the entire world in near real time. came to within 7% of the accuracy of a full-blown model with all the bathymetry and all of the resolution. WaveFORCE is ready to be implemented. We're seeking funding at the moment. What we're after is, what we're looking at the moment is for users and stakeholders that are interested in becoming involved with us. There's a sheet just out the front handout that will help you get a little bit more information, but also point you at a website and give you the ability to get in touch with us. These are the emails that you should use if you want to get in touch with GEO for Health, AquaWatch, or WaveFORCE. So thank you.
Thank you, William. Questions from the audience? Question over there.
Microphone, and a much voice. All right, David Green from NASA and CEOS represent the Working Group on Disasters for all satellite agencies. So we have flood within CEOS, which is looking at all the satellites and now reaching across to the meteorological satellites to bring them to bear on flood and flood risk. Within GEO, I lead a community activity called Global Flood Risk Monitoring. Yesterday we had a site event where we identified at least 4 or 5 other groups that have flood somehow incorporated. We've also reached across the blue planet. So I'm feeling I've got yet another community here that I would like to at least suggest join us. We're going to be looking at our work plans over the next few months to see where we really are aligned, using the same either satellites or maps or partnerships, or working in the same geography to try to see. And so these are not necessarily competing, but we're all running kind of in parallel, I think, in many cases. So I just want to make that as a comment and perhaps an action as you think about your work plans here, that there's several others that are quite close and able to amplify the efforts that are going on.
We will definitely get in touch. Just on that point, our project is forecasting, although we'll be able to monitor as well, but not, well, monitoring as much as we can model now, but we won't be we're not intending to monitor. So from that perspective, very interested in getting in touch. There are 2 types of flood forecasting too that we need to do for coasts. One is for sandy beaches and for that matter, rocky coastlines, and the other one is for coral reef lined coasts. They are 2 fundamentally different modelling efforts. As far as we know, we are the only people that have a model that is capable of being rolled out throughout the whole world. We are in touch with all of the other modelling efforts on coral reefs, so we haven't ignored the rest of the community, but definitely we'll be in touch.
One more question? Okay, thank you, William. Remember, there's ice cream up there. There's still ice creams. You can go and grab one. We also are asking questions on Slido. So if you go to www.slido.com, SLIDO.com, and our number is R585, so R for radio 585, and we're asking what is the water issue for you, and we'll have a look at that after Nick Bex has spoken. So now we have our next speaker, Nick Bex, who will talk about the role of GEO water activities in climate with respect to the Paris Climate Agreement. Nick.
Thank you, Arnold, and I am the presenter of this talk, but the talk was prepared fundamentally by Frank Muller-Cargo from the University of South Florida with help from Mary Beth with AquaWatch and Gabrielle Canonico with IUS. So I think, in a way, this slide has been talked about a little bit before, but water is a fundamental issue for both GEO and for the SDGs. I think I quite liked Emily Small's first slide, which showed very clearly how the water flows through the different SDGs. And then clearly there are many GEO groups, which I don't think I'm doing that, many GEO groups who are involved in water. And I think I'm waiting for someone to, oh, there we go. So this is, I guess, another illustration how our water and life are inextricably intertwined. And I found this quite interesting. Here we have all the water in the world. 97% is in the oceans, 3% in fresh water. Of that amount in fresh water, 79% is in glaciers and ice caps. Groundwater, 29%. Accessible surface fresh water, 1% of 3%. And they're in lakes, water vapor. And 1% of 3% is in rivers. So I think there's a lot of water in the world, but you can't always get it. And we have been monitoring water for a long time, of course, water, but also climate. And the point here is that we're not in a stationary environment anymore. We can't look at water, we can't look at things and decide what would happen if we took our foot off the pedal and we could go back to where we were 10 years ago. Temperatures have been rising enough that the waters are warmer, there's more energy for storms, droughts will be longer, evaporation will be more severe. So there's increasing interest and need to understand how water is working in the world and how it's changing biodiversity as climate changes. And ecosystem services are under threat, so it's not just that we're worried about the water, it's that the water is supporting many different sources of ecosystem services. That's the simple way of describing ecosystem services from a 9th grade biology textbook. I know the UN economic environmental accounting is getting far more sophisticated at that, but so far they haven't managed to apply accounts for the marine environment, which is clearly a lack. And we're still trying to work out a look at ecosystem services. And here you can see that there are many factors affecting those ecosystem services. It's not just one aspect of water. Here we have in ocean stress from climate, there's hypoxia, acidification, warming, pathogens, chemical, nutrient and acoustic pollution, overfishing and ship traffic, and no doubt you could add a few more of your own to that list. So the core message from the GEO Partners here is GEOS is evolving to provide observations. If we really want to understand what's going on in this climate change, this changing climate, where so many aspects of the physical environment are affecting so many aspects of the biological environment, we really need to improve the level of our observations. And we need that not only to advance our own knowledge, but also to guide investments, to guide restoration. Where would restoration really work? How can we get the industries to invest in the marine community when we can't have, we don't at the moment, aren't able to look at blue bonds in similar ways we have green bonds? How do we evaluate the success of adaptation activities? Over the next 10 years, several decades, you could hope that the marine community or the world community will be putting large amounts of effort into accounting for climate change. And if we can't evaluate the success of those, then we'll waste even more money than is normally wasted on many of these international programs. And we do need those to have those targets and assess our progress towards them. So one aspect of monitoring and trying to bring the community together is through essential variables. And we have essential ocean variables, which is the ones I'm more involved with, essential climate variables, essential weather variables. Here we have the essential biodiversity variables, both here terrestrial and terrestrial ECVs there. And there is an overlap between those, but there is a danger also that those communities almost compete against one another for what is the most essential variable. And so we've been working a lot in the marine space to try and overcome that. And so, for example, working through with MBON especially, you can see we have the essential biodiversity variables on the right, and these directly link into the essential ocean variables produced by the Global Ocean Observing System, and these feed directly into these new essential climate variables, plankton, marine habitat properties. We're also now kind of looking in this GCOS space to see what exists for the terrestrial and freshwater areas, you know, and it's actually quite difficult to come up with a set of variables like this to link the EBVs to the ECVs in freshwater or terrestrial environment. It seems that in those areas, climate has, or the ECVs, the climate variables, have been more about closing the carbon cycle rather than looking at the impacts of climate on biodiversity and ecosystem services. So I think that's a kind of a work in progress. And I think that's amplified here. So here we're looking, this is looking at a goose value chain produced for the Ocean Obs recently. You look across this top line here, research and innovation, there's a nice link between satellite and in situ work. So this is clearly where GEO sits. Real-time data systems, ocean-coupled forecasts, WaveFORCE services, operational services. Similarly for climate, we're getting reanalysis, forecast, climate services, climate. When we come down to biology, well, we get a bit vague, you know, model research, scenarios, indicators, ocean health and service assessments, ocean health. It's actually all pretty vague, and we need to do a better job in biology of making sure that we can relink our biological observations into things people care about and the things which really affect international conventions, be it SDGs or the CBD. As I said, there is a need to expand the essential climate variables, and one area in particular which has been picked up by EcoWatch is the need to enhance some of the freshwater variables which are forming ECVs, in particular lake colour, and they've made several recommendations here for SEAL support of long-term multi-sensor climate quality time series. And I think the point is here also that they need quite a lot of calibration of those different sensors. You need a lot of understanding of how the different reflectance in different areas is quite different. Each lake is different and different at different times of the year. And it'll come throughout the talk, the need to develop joint plans to link up better than possibly what we're doing at the moment. And this is kind of links to that area of how do we interpret some of this satellite information. And there is meant to be another graph on this slide, which seems to have got missed off the presentation, I think. And this is a very nice example of looking at calibration of seagrass and macroalgal communities in British Columbia. And you can go back to a couple of interesting points. One is it's not just linking in situ observation with satellite observation. It's actually recognizing that there's a space for unpeopled or unmanned, can't say unmanned, unpeopled aerial vehicles or drones using cameras to get really 2 centimeter resolution pictures of the underwater community of seagrass. And that can be linked with satellite pictures. It can be linked with in situ observations. So it's those 3 levels which also work very well for mangrove monitoring. And you can then go back through historic archives and see how seagrass was being lost at the first half of the last century due to water quality, and is now in the deep areas, and now seagrass is being lost in the shallow areas due to coastal development. So our marine communities, and no doubt our freshwater communities, have been suffering stresses for a century or more, and it's imperative of us that as we move forward, we understand what that full history is. This is an example from the lakes and a Lake Balaton. And what I took from this is the difficulty really in applying a single algorithm to a lake to understand when a bloom occurs, how strong that bloom is. The baseline optical properties of lakes will be different. They may differ from year to year. And I think one of the takeaway messages from this paper was that instead of just taking a mean value, but actually taking the full spatial analysis of that lake and using that as your data set instead of a mean value for the lake, you end up with a far richer interpretation of what's really going on. And you can see where your remote sensing is providing sometimes a misleading picture or sometimes misses events which might otherwise pick up. I think here we show that one of the difficulties we have, certainly in the marine environment, is the relatively low numbers of biological information. So there are major gaps in the world where we have almost no biological information, despite this is an OBIS where there's 60 million data points from 600 different species from many different databases around the world. There's still major gaps of the ocean where we know very little which is going on. And so we are working together, Goose, OBIS and other networks listed here, to start increasing that and providing not only the information on the biodiversity, but the trends in that biodiversity over time. I think I've been saying along, information is critical for sustainable development in a changing world. And to give you an idea of how this is changing, this was a IUCN report, I think, last year, OECD, and looks like it was more than last year. This is what we think of as the industries which are impacting the marine environment. And there's some here, shipping and ports, which would have affected life in the beginning of the last decade and now more recent ones. But these are the emerging industries, deep, offshore aquaculture as well as shallow water aquaculture, affecting major areas around the world. Oil and gas exploration, wind energy, renewable energy. Seabed mining, of course, is quite topical for the deep ocean, marine safety surveillance, biotechnologies and others. And so we are looking at quite a different set of ocean-based industries. And I think it's been said by quite a few people that over this 20-year period from 2010 to 2030, we're expecting to double the value of the global economy from the oceans. It does match in very well another figure, which is over the same period we're meant to be doubling the amount of shipping in the world's oceans, which, as marine mammals start to recover as well, suggests we might have a few issues, or a few more issues, with collisions between industry and biodiversity. Which variables advance for area development of conservation goals? I think this emphasises a point that water is one of the major influences on weather, climate and gases. And it is that diversity of life which makes Earth habitable and provides those ecosystem services. So the Goose Biology and Ecosystem Panel has been working with MBON and working with Blue Planet to identify the essential ocean variables through a driver pressure state impact response process, where the drivers are based on 24 international organisations and conventions, which countries have to report against. The monitoring is derived from 124 existing monitoring networks. And this is where we need to really start improving the kind of information we're sending back to society so they understand the value of marine monitoring. I'm going to skip that one. And the oceans and humans are inextricably linked. And I think this is possibly the last slide showing that the area where we still need to do a lot of work on is data integration. We're working very much with GEO, MBON, OBIS in producing this data, getting more data in here, and it's getting into more global and local databases. But that's really what we need, is to get that information into a form which influences policymakers, influences local and global governments more than it is doing already. And Frank's recommendations for to this session really was the need to develop a strategy for GEO partner programs to work together. And I think perhaps we got a little flavour of that in the wave forecasting. Share best practices. I think it's almost incumbent on scientists these days to use best practice and document them. Really, if you're not using best practices, if you're not making your data fair and open, then you are really contributing to the increasing inequality of scientific capacity in the world. We need to develop joint efforts to address indicators that include biological parameters. We're doing a lot of work working with some of the more mature physical observing programs to add biological parameters to those. And Frank suggests starting with 1 to 3 pilot programs that address the urgent stakeholder needs. One thing which hasn't come out in this presentation is MBON does have a very interesting pole-to-pole initiative where they're working with quite sophisticated biological observing around the United States, and then they're doing a lot of capacity development through Central America and South America to then start that whole process, so they'll have from the Arctic to the ocean through the Americas an understanding of how marine biodiversity is changing. And I think that is it. This is just the final slide, I think, showing that we're all in this together, so we need to cooperate. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes. Wait for the microphone. Wait for the microphone, please. Thank you.
You said there is large gaps in deep parts of oceans where we're not getting any data. What are the technologies that are being developed to change that, and who's doing that?
So I would say that some of the technologies. I give you an idea of the scope of the problem in the deep parts of the ocean. If we go around Australia, if we go and survey an area where we've been to somewhat before, we go below about 1,000 meters. We would expect 50% of all the species to come up to be due to science. And so there's a large amount of areas which are not discovered. Traditionally, we've relied on trawls and sleds and stuff like that. We're now increasingly using remote operated vehicles to go down there, remote towed videos. The autonomous underwater vehicles are playing a major part in mapping the sea floor, and GEBCO is working a lot in that space to come up with a map of the world bathymetry in the next decade. So, ironically, the groups which are leading this, is industry, oil and gas industry. They want to go deeper. There's a impetus for deep sea mining for geopolitical purposes. So, it will be industry which develops that technology, and then we start using it. The other area, of course, is genetics, and that's being driven by the medical industry, and we pick up on their advances. So, we're really at the tail end of picking up advances from other people. So.
Any more questions? Yes.
Just want to pick up on that, excuse me, the point you made about industry. Obviously have a lot of interests and technical capabilities. And in, I think, your third last slide, you talked about all the different sectors that are dependent on currently and in the future. One of the discussions we've had about GEO, its participation here has been largely government agencies and academics. And there's been some controversy, I guess, about the role of private sector in being part of some of our GEO activities and GEO work plans. Is there any comments or recommendations going forward from your activities to say that we should not just be aware of what they're doing, but actually bring them more into the fold of our GEO activities? Is there a recommendation or something to go forward at this week?
I think so, very much. I mean, we need to engage with industry more. There was a large attempt to engage with industry at Ocean Obs, 1,500 people, and a smattering of industry really showed up, which was, I think, disappointing to the organisers. I do wonder sometimes whether we're not targeting the wrong industries to some degree. You know, we target the miners, we target the oil and gas. Perhaps we should be targeting the insurance industries, the banks. These are the people who are much more cognizant of risk, and they're the ones who want to know what the risks are. And, you know, we are the best people to provide that estimates of risk. And so I think if we can get into that more financial aspect of investment and risk, I think we do better.
More questions? So first of all, I'd like to thank all the presenters, also for keeping to time. That is so nice when you're facilitating a meeting like this. This is absolutely perfect. So just to applause for the presenters. So now we're going to the panel discussion, and we've asked the presenters to join the panel, as well as Simon Linker from Conservation International, Nick Souter from Conservation International. Simon is standing in for somebody else from the paper. And we were going to have a dialect. You were coming as well. And it's Argie Carvalho. She was going to be here, but apparently she's gone somewhere else. But that's okay, because you're the panel as well, all of you. It's not like the panel has to lead the conversation.
Also, is there Pamela? Pamela for EO for Health in here? No? Please have another ice cream if you came in late. They're in the back. And I can give you some questions that have come in on the slide.
So just to go back to the Slido here. So we've asked everybody with 1 to 2 words, what is your main water issue? 21 responses, which is great. And it seems like algal blooms, water quality, and overuse of water, I presume, are some of the main topics that this audience finds the most important. And then, of course, there's a lot of other aspects that deal with similar issues. Some are about the information, so they're about harmonization, information, availability, and quality, sharing, open, easy, access, scale. I'm not sure what flash is. Extraction, and that's interesting because they have to do with how we manage the data and how we harness the data to become useful for society. And then on top of that, there are the issues that many, let's say, that have been mentioned less, but have been presented already in all the presentations around drought is an interesting one, because is it a land issue or a water issue? Well, it's a lack of water issue, so that becomes an interesting discussion to have, a philosophical discussion more than anything else. But anyway, thank you very much. But this is useful for us to say, well, what are the main issues that at least this audience thinks, and audience, by the way, that might be interacting through the streaming of this event as well. And it's actually still changing, so that's good. We have a next question coming up, which is, what do you think GEO should do? And that's an open question. Now, whether we can get around to analyzing the results maybe towards the end of this panel discussion, but we will certainly use that internally because all the groups are invited to come and talk to us between 5 and 6 at the Royal Theatre. No, not the Royal Theatre, between 5 and 6 at the idea stage on the first floor, because we want to talk with all the organizations that have presented and that are here to talk about further actions. So between 5 and 6 on the first floor. That would be wonderful if you could come as well. So the next question is, what are the actions that GEO should take? And we might actually go back to the panel for that. So there it is. So interact. So there's a few questions here which have come up from Slido.
Yes, there are. The first one is, went away. Sorry. For Conservation International. What is green versus gray infrastructure? What are the benefits for a community or government for using green versus gray infrastructure? Why do it?
Okay, so by grey infrastructure, we're meaning traditional things made of concrete and metal. So pipes, dams, traditional water delivery and processing infrastructure, so for delivery and water quality. Green infrastructure is generally living things and natural features. So forests, wetlands are largely our green infrastructure. So traditionally, as I said, grey has been widely used, but natural green infrastructure can be very useful in providing a lot of services, and not only for treating water, securing supply, and also providing good quality water, provides a lot of other benefits, such as fisheries, forests can be for carbon sequestration, etc., etc. So I think the statistic that was up in the slide before was that by 2030, which is not that far away, there'll be a 40% increase in the demand for water. And to be able to supply all of that will cost trillions and trillions of dollars if we were to use grey infrastructure. And that's a lot of concrete, that if you're looking at dams, that has to come from somewhere. Whereas green infrastructure, using already existing natural components of the landscape, can provide many of the benefits at a much cheaper cost. So we're interested in looking at how green infrastructure can be used at a much greater extent in providing safe and abundant water for people. So that links back to our SDG goals. And also how there's the blending of green and grey, because to get water into people's houses, you still need the pipes. As for why doing it, multiple benefits from green infrastructure, and particularly for the developing world, it comes at potentially a much cheaper cost.
Can I add something? Because this is actually one of the core activities of the Freshwater Bond at the moment. So Roger Sayre, who is here, and I are the data leads in a CSync working group at the moment. So basically what we want to do, a lot of people have really talked about these trade-offs between green and grey infrastructures, but at a larger scale, no one's really ever assessed or modeled how this will work. So one of the activities of the Freshwater Bond is at the moment a CSync working group that will basically calculate these through for sub-Saharan Africa. Small area, but yeah, so for the entire sub-Saharan Africa, we do have a lot of data on. The interesting part about this in an Earth observation context is that the green infrastructure is actually incredibly well mapped. So we've got great maps of wetlands, of rivers, of forests. We can really model sediment and nutrient retention by these very, very well. But on such a large scale, the grey infrastructure, so as Nick said, the pipes, the stormwater runoff, at those large scales, we are actually having trouble to source good data on those. So that's potentially a challenge. And if anyone has any idea of sourcing data, please ping me or Roger at the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Is there a question in the audience, a burning question? Because we like to have, interactivity between the audience and the panel. They are the audience, you're the panel, that's also possible. Otherwise, we'll go to a Slido question. Okay, so Mary Beth? Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
There's a bit of a process going on at the moment to develop indicators for CBD post-2020 on things like restoration, ecosystem services, and I'm kind of interested in the green and grey infrastructure. I'm just, perhaps this is a question to the audience really. If you were looking for a measure of how much of the coast or the lake has been hardened, what proportion is, would you call it green coastline, and what part is grey coastline? Is it something GEO could do? Could you produce that data as an index and say what proportion of the world's coastline is natural and what part is hardened? Yes, so is it possible using current data to measure how much of the world's coastline has been hardened with grey infrastructure as against has been left not necessarily pristine, but is still in green infrastructure?
So this is a really interesting question that I think many of us haven't thought of before as being something that's needed. I know that having looked at lots of coastal images, I've seen it, but I've never thought of mapping it. So we actually have access to the data, I think, but we've never had a systematic way of measuring it, but I think definitely with the high resolution spatial data it's now possible. I saw Newman Miller kind of react. Have you got an idea about this?
I'm not sure how to do it in a consistent way.
I'm thinking of Norman Mueller works on Digital Earth Australia, which is the data cube, which is harnessing 30 years of satellite data and including now Sentinel-2 data. And so what you could do, once you've got that data all collated and collected, you can probably start doing analysis of where there's been change in the last 30 years, which is a very quick way to saying, well, most likely that's hardening, or at least something has happened there. People have changed it. William?
I just want to qualify the question rather than the answer. This is a much harder question than people think, because it's not a matter of going and saying, oh, that's a seawall and that's sand, because the reality of life is longshore drift means that that seawall has affected the beach for how many kilometres downstream and in effect turned it into grey infrastructure almost. Well, not necessarily, it's an effect of a grey infrastructure, but still it's no longer green. So it's going to be really difficult to nut that out, actually.
Also, a lot of seawalls have mangroves and whatnot in front of them.
Can you open it? Switch itself on. So, does anybody want to react to this? Otherwise, did you want to react?
I have a startup that artificial intelligence creates an Internet of Nature system to do exactly that you explained.
Sorry, can you repeat that with the microphone, please? Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually working on what you're talking about, trying to understand the differences and how things react from far away and how does that all measure and work out. I think there's enough data to start that, and I've been compiling that through an artificial intelligence I call the Internet of Nature that works exactly in that aspect to make better decision making and then get that hands into anybody who wants it for free. So I do believe there's enough now, and I think over time we just get more and more and we characterize it and we put machine learning through it. It's quite capable of doing that, and releasing that next year, so maybe we can talk more about that after this.
This is the kind of connections we need to make in these kind of discussions. Just a minute. Yes?
Not only are we interested in the coastline, but it's also very important for riverine systems to work out which components have been modified either through armouring or channelization. So I've very, very briefly looked at doing that, not being a GEO expert, for our freshwater health index that CI has. One of our indicators is how natural the river system actually is. And fortunately, the basin I was working in was largely natural, so I could ignore it. But when we do get into ones that are largely have been very modified, that is an indicator that would be useful.
And coming from the Netherlands originally, in 1996, the Netherlands, the center part of the Netherlands, with an economy value for a greenhouse vegetation and agricultural produce of about $40 to $60 billion, with 2 million residents, almost flooded because the rivers, the River Rhine and Meuse, had been canalized so much, also upstreams, and so much hardening of surfaces, that at a certain moment there was a king tide on the North Sea, snow melt in the Alps, heavy rainfall in the catchment, and the central part of the Netherlands came within 10 millimeters of the dikes actually overflooding, and they would have to evacuate 2 to 3 million people. So this is and what has happened in the Netherlands, they've spent massive amounts in Germany and in the Netherlands now on opening all the floodplains, taking away all the illegal campings, and stimulating people not to put concrete everywhere, because that just speeds. So it's actually, there's real life consequences, and yeah, that was a, that's a good issue. Yes, we had another.
Yeah, just to follow up, I have a trouble boiling it down to two colors, green and gray. We need more colors than that. We're humans. We're color-based. But for me, it's looking like there's a blue infrastructure, and those are the actual surface water features, rivers and streams, lakes and ponds, wetlands. And there's the green, which is all the natural and semi-natural vegetation, forest, shrubs, grasslands, what have you. But then croplands are delivering water as well, and so that's sort of a tan infrastructure. But I agree with Simon that the hard part is the gray infrastructure, because, and really, do we know it on the coast? We do know how much of the coast is composed of impervious surface, sort of shorewards, inland, and even out into the water. But we don't know the different kinds of, the shades of gray. You know, what of that is just water, is impervious surface, or what is an actually built water collection or delivery mechanism? So I think it's really the gray infrastructure that's troubling. I think we're getting there on mapping all the other colors of natural infrastructure.
Okay, good. So we have a question on Slido, and the way Slido works, by the way, you can look at the questions other people are asking, and then you can support them, so they go up in importance. So you can boost certain questions up. Currently, the question with the most approval says, what are the future data needs for Earth observation water monitoring? Smaller pixel size, quicker revisit, better spectral resolution. The only difficulty with the question is that EO water for freshwater monitoring or for ocean monitoring or for coastal monitoring? Is there somebody who would like to respond to that?
Not me.
I can, because that's the area of my expertise, so I'm happy to become part of the panel, but I first want others to give that opportunity. So, so in reality, oceans are well served by ocean color sensors and sea surface temperature sensors and radar sensors, radar altimetry, etc. So oceans have because for 30 years already ocean observing has been well organized by the international community. Could be better, but it is well organized. The problem with the Earth observation of inland waters, estuaries, floodplains, lagoons, coral reefs, seagrasses, has been that the Earth observation has had to use either land sensors which were not designed for water, because they have the right spatial resolution, or they could use the ocean color sensors which have the right sensitivity and spectral resolution, but then don't have sufficient spatial resolution. So in effect, the inland water, the wetland community, estuaries, people studying floodplains, corals, seagrasses, macroalgae, they're all struggling because they actually have to use sensors that were not designed for that purpose. So there has been a study that several people here in the audience and at this GEO plenary have been involved in, which effectively is saying, well, you need high spectral resolution, high spatial resolution, but you can sacrifice radiometric resolution in order to get the high spectral and spatial resolution, which will make those sensors, if they ever get built, much more affordable. If you want all three, it becomes extremely expensive and it becomes engineering feats of excellence, but the price goes from 20 million to 200 million to $500 million. If we're able to develop sensors from satellites between $5 and $20 million, and we can have several of them, we can get high frequency, high spectral resolution, high spatial resolution. But it's always a trade-off. But at the moment, we do not have any dedicated sensors for the areas that many of the areas we've been discussing, except for the oceans and the large coastal waters and the large inland waters, because they can be done with ocean color sensors. Does anybody else want to react to that?
I'd like to turn that question around and ask those in the audience, what do you need? If you're a manager or you're a decision maker, what do you
Simon?
Yeah, for me, I'm a user, right? So I'm a modeler. I'm not a remote sensor. I'm more of a GIS type modeler. I think good guidance on homogenization, I think, would be something that that I'm always struggling with, right? So we have a whole bunch of different sensors, a whole bunch of other different data layers. They're all in different scales, they're in different projections, but mainly the scales is really a problem. I mean, a lot of global models have been built on 50-kilometer grids, and then I get from some of you, I get 30-meter grids. So I have to, if I want to homogenize those models together, it kind of pains me to upscale the 30-meter grids to a 50-kilometer, and so I think that's just something where I really don't know what to do. Yes, you can downscale some stuff, but a bit of guidance on this model and scale homogenization, I think, would be something that I'd be really interested in.
So, Simon, do you want the tools or do you want somebody else to do it?
I would like the tools, but also more of a philosophical guidance on it, right? So I can press some buttons in R myself, but it's more about what's the best practice? What tools do I need? What are the limits of downscaling, things like that?
Okay, is there somebody else who wants to react?
So you're asking what exactly we would want from GEO, correct? My main thing for coming here is getting that framework of how I need to be putting all the data together in an algorithmic form. So just how you see everything. Going back to my law school days, I would say sort of like a blue book, how to read the book that you got to read. So once I get that information from experts who've spent years on this, I can go from there and take the data and make things much easier for myself. So, framework.
But the point is, you want to work with the data.
Yeah.
You don't want somebody to just create a product for you, or you don't want to have to use the product that was already created for somebody else.
Yeah, I want to create the product, so.
Okay, good. Nick?
I'm just thinking of your question on scale and sensitivity. If we want to count whales with satellites, which does occur, you're better off, the World Watch 2, you're better off using the black and white spectrum because you get 0.6 of a meter resolution than the hyperspectral resolution, which I think is, about 2 meters. So if you want to count whales, you want 0.6 of a meter. So it does. So if satellite technology improves, we will find more uses for it. If you want to understand how seagrasses or mangrove meadows are changing, again, you're down at the meter. You're down at the meter level of resolution. And then if you want to work out whether it's a healthy mangrove forest or a rather depauperate one, or it's actually leaking into some other kind of coastal vegetation, then you're going to need the really good hyperspectral sensors. So I think basically if they build it, we'll use it.
Yeah, but the building increasingly needs to be, there needs to be a societal benefit. So the space agencies are changing their game. They used to just be technology push. We can do this, let's launch this, look how good we are. Now that's actually really changing into many space agencies are now under pressure to say, well, what's your benefit to society? So then the end user or stakeholder requirements become important, and they have to start saying, well, this is what we want, can you build it? Which is the opposite way, which is where definitely the trend is going increasingly. William?
Just a comment on that. Your last few words were spot on. It won't get built if the users don't ask for it. It can't be us remote sensors. We ask all the time, and we're told, well, we haven't been asked by any users. So the users have got to engage to make that happen, and that's where GEO can really come into its own. NOAA doesn't allow me to build any algorithms, let alone satellites, if the managers and users actually don't ask for it. So we're forever trying to teach the managers to ask the questions so that we can get what we want done.
So there's one more question, and I think this is of a different one, which DILEC, probably I'll go to DILEC then, which are, what are citizen scientists interested in helping out with on water issues? What are their challenges to engage? Is that something you can talk to, DILEC?
Yeah, maybe. Sorry that I'm not really involved in the discussion because I'm not expert in this field myself. We are in the citizen science community activity looking into the ways where citizen science data could complement Earth observation monitoring as well as SDG, Earth observation and as well as SDG monitoring. So I guess there's, we already discussed, Emily presented very nicely that citizen science is already adopted by the UN environment for a marine plastics related indicator, and also there's great potential for citizen science to contribute to water quality, so 632 indicator. There are a lot of initiatives that are ongoing globally in this field where citizen science could actually help complement the data on a national level, and I think we just need to take full advantage and use the potential of this source, not only in terms of filling data gaps, but also involving people, citizens in these all data collection and monitoring activities. So we also talked about SDG frameworks and DAI and all of that. And these are not only about data, these are also about action. So if you want to action in place, if we want this transformation with the SDGs to happen, we really need to involve citizens in all these data and monitoring activities. So that's the comment maybe I can make on behalf of the citizen science community activity. But if there's any interest in terms of other GEO groups, activities or initiatives, flagships, that they want to find out more about how citizen science could contribute to their own activities, please get in touch with us. We're happy to provide you with more information on how we could help each other on that. Thank you.
So thank you. I think we've reached the end of our time. So this is a folder with all the different GEO groups, so contact them. Tell them what they can do better. If you want to engage with us between 5 and 6 on the first floor near the little black benches, that would be fantastic if you've got ideas. There were quite a lot of Slido questions which we didn't discuss, but there's some really good ones, even though nobody said, yes, I like it. There's a lot of questions there, very useful for us. So thank you very much for that. I would like to thank the panel. I'd like to thank the audience, just applause. And the ice cream sponsor as well. Take an ice cream on your way out. We've paid for them anyway. Well, the sponsor has. Thank you.